Hi, welcome to Transform and Thrive. I'm your host, Jessalin Lamb, and this series is all about uncovering the stories of transformation, resilience, and growth that inspire us to embrace change and thrive in our lives. So, in each episode, I sit down with trailblazers who've turned challenges into opportunities, and they share their pivotal lessons and mindset shifts that led to their transformation. And today's guest is Simeon Coker, who is a creative executive with over 2 decades of experience crafting brand stories and experiences for global brands and entrepreneurs. Guided by a deep curiosity for how people live, he sees culture not as a trend, but as a system we actively shape. As head of creative at Valerie, a full service creative agency rooted in culture, he helps marketers and leaders engage communities with clarity, purpose, and cultural fluency. Welcome. So happy to have you
Hey, happy
here.
to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, we'll dive right in into transformation. Can you share a significant challenge or turning point in your life that became a catalyst for transformation?
Yeah, back in 2017, I was at a job that shall remain nameless, but it wasn't the ideal situation. It was very taxing mentally and spiritually, and I decided to leave that job. And when I left that job, I did not look for a new job. I remember the week that job ended. I went to a happy hour with some friends and they were like, all right, so what's next? And I was like, I think I'm gonna do my own thing. And I would say that was the turning point in my life. Because growing up, child of immigrants, first generation American, the game plan is you go to college, you get a job, that job has to have benefits. And that is what it means to be an adult. And so to decide on a whim, and I say a whim loosely, but to decide very casually that I was going to start doing my own thing was a turning point. And a few years before that, I did create an LLC, but I didn't know what I was going to use it for. I just had an inkling. I was coming off of probably one of the longest vacations I've ever taken, where I went to Nigeria, where my father's from. I also went to Brazil, and I call that trip a transformative trip because I just felt like I learned so many things about myself. I was so inspired. And there were two moments in that trip that really sat with me. One was I bought this piece of jewelry in Brazil that had pyrite on it, the pyrite stone. And then, and I had this really deep, moving conversation with the artist who created it. And then when I was in Nigeria, I met an artist who was the chief of her village, and she was helping women in the village provide for themselves and to create a living by preserving the art of the indigo dyeing of the cloth. And so when I came back from this trip, I was like, you know what? So inspired. Let me file this LLC, and I called it Indigo and Pyrite, and it just sat there. And I was just like, I'll figure out what to do with it later. And so when I left that job, I was like, all right, it's go time. I don't know what go time means, but it's go time. And yeah, I had no job. I put that in quotation marks, and I had no benefits. But within a week, I was on a plane to Jamaica to pitch a project. And so I would say that was a turning point of like really believing that being an entrepreneur was no longer just an idea, it could actually be a thing. And I was just doing it.
Yeah, and you're taking that risk. And I can't even imagine how many challenges that you had to overcome during that time. So I'm curious, like what was the biggest challenge you faced during this period and how you overcame it?
I think the biggest challenge was just not knowing and trying to figure
Yeah.
things out. The idea of being an entrepreneur, I've always had an idea semblance or just a concept of what it is, right? Growing up, it's like entrepreneurs are hustlers, right? So you just kind of figure things out. And so I would say not knowing was probably the biggest challenge, not knowing what to charge. I never freelanced before.
Hmm.
Not knowing how to put together a scope that I would have. And these are things that I've engaged with within an agency, but I've never had to do it on my own, right? And so
Mhm.
the biggest challenge was figuring out the logistics of things and actually being the person who's not just implementing but building, and it's still the challenge, right? Because when you're in the structure of a corporation, different people do different things, right? So
Yeah.
when you're an entrepreneur, you're the person doing all of the things. And I think that has been the biggest challenge. And then I would say the mindset of not knowing and being okay with not knowing. And then also, what do you do with not knowing? Running joke right now with that I'm realizing with so many of my friends is that we just don't know how to ask for help. Like
Mm,
it was
mhm.
never a part of how we were raised.
Yeah.
And so not knowing and then figuring it out, and then also strategically figuring out how to ask for help, how to accept help, how to implement help in a way that moves the business forward.
Yeah. That's great. And you mentioned a lot about you're talking about mindset. I want to touch a little bit more about that because the mindset shifts that we make really help us when it comes to how we're moving forward and how we're growing. I'm curious to hear what were some of your mindset shifts that have helped you continue to move forward.
I think, and I say this with empathy, but I think the mindset that a lot of my parents and other immigrant parents had around employment comes from a place of scarcity. But it's
Mm,
also, and I think the empathy comes in where it's like, well, they also come from a different time, but it was never entrepreneurship was never something that was mentioned or an
right.
option because benefits, good job, and also
Stability of all of that.
the
Yeah.
stability of all of it. And
Yeah.
so I think even though I took the risk and I jumped off the bridge with all of my limbs, it's just flailing. Um, there was still a little bit of a scarcity mindset, right? It's like, oh my God, how it's like, what am I gonna do? And even though I think being an entrepreneur is one of the most egotistical things you can do, and I mean that in like the best way possible, because it's almost akin to magic, right? That you have this idea and this concept in your brain and you actually bring it into the world and make it tangible. And while it sounds simple for some people, it's not, right? They're
Right.
like what so many of us have done, so many people have talked about doing, but they never actually did it. And
Mhm.
so it being this sort of magical thing that happens, there's still with or at least for me, there was still a little bit of the scarcity mindset of just trying to make sure that I was doing the right thing. And the mindset shift came from, I would say it was probably about 6 months to 8 months into this journey where I was like, all right, so I'm making some money, I'm paying my bills, which is always my metric. Um, and a friend of mine mentioned that she went to an executive coach, and I was like, huh, how'd you like what? Tell me the things. And she was like, I just paid for it. I was like, I've heard this concept, I've heard of people doing it, but I never thought about doing it for myself because it
Mm,
seemed like something that was so many levels above me.
yeah.
And so I just reached out, I was like, give me the person's number. And I reached out to her and she said, one of the first things that she said was, I was like, how much? And she's like, why are you worried about how much before you actually understand the value? And
Mm,
her pitch that caught me and it still catches me to this day. And whenever I hear anyone in their career, especially at the mid to executive level struggling, like, I think it's time for you to get a coach. I mean, what she said was, Oprah has a coach, LeBron has a coach, Bill Gates has a coach. Why do
yep.
you think you're better than getting a coach? I said, you know
Mhm.
what? You're right. And that coaching experience really shifted my brain from a place of scarcity of strategizing based off of lack and strategizing for what happens if the best thing happens, right? And so
Yep.
looking at all of the opportunities through this lens of abundance. And so even when your billables are down, you're kind of like, all right, but it's coming. And then it comes. And so there's like this weird this weird mindset shift that happened during that moment where, and I refuse to go back to, regardless of whatever is going on, where I know that there's more than enough that exists
Hmm.
within the world, within the industry, within the economy, where what I need can be met, but then also what I want can be achieved because there's so much money floating around. Like, and there's so much money and there's so much opportunity. And I think when we take a bird's eye view of the landscape, then we understand exactly like how small we are in it, but then also how much is available to us because there's just so much floating around. And so I would say that was probably the biggest shift of moving from a place of lack and more about what can I actually have based off of my skill sets, based off of my community, based off of the opportunities that exist around me.
Yeah. And that's a good reminder because even as you're sharing your story, I was thinking about how you're shifting from that scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset
Mhm,
and how you're doing that by not only manifesting, you're manifesting it into reality by really thinking about the abundance. So that's
mhm.
amazing. And
Yeah.
and also I wanted to go into learning lessons in terms of more more in the terms of moments of failure. Because
Mhm.
when we have a growth mindset, we're embracing mistakes and learning from that. I'd love for you to share, you could pick a failure or mistake that you made, and then how did you learn from it?
I will say part of the mindset shift is I just really don't look at a lot of things as failures. Um, and
Mm,
it sounds a little delulu, and it is, and it should be because I remember. So when I started, one of the things that I did was when I jumped off the ledge, I was like, I want to have impact. I want to make sure that what I'm doing has impact. And so I started working with a for profit, and then I also founded a nonprofit at the same time. And so my goal was that these two things would work together. I would be fueling the pipeline by raising money to basically subsidize entrepreneurs who couldn't necessarily afford all of my fees, and then also bringing in people of color and people from marginalized backgrounds and giving them an opportunity to work on my business without actually like the risk, right? Because I would basically be raising the money to pay them. And it was a lot. It was a lot to do at once. It also didn't allow me to have like a very concise pitch. And
mm,
so after a while, I was like, yeah, this is too much. This is crazy. I also went through, the executive coaching and I was like, all right, I'm going to sunset this. And I remember there were people who were like, two things. I remember when I decided to sunset it and I was like, oh man, I think people are going to be asking about what happened to the nonprofit. And there was a little voice that was like, well, did you fail at it? And I was like, well, I didn't fail. Like, I raised money, I hired people. It was just
mhm,
too much. Like, there was just too much to be done. And I decided to sunset it. And so when I started to circulate the messaging of like, it's no longer, I remember there were a few people like, yo, so how do you feel? And I was like, great. Like, I did it. I
yeah.
learned. Um, I didn't do all of the things that I set out to do, but I did some of the things. And within the some of the things that I did, there were learnings. And so for me, as long as there is a learning,
Hmm.
I'm okay. Like I've had to like sit with it. It's also something that I'm constantly trying to remind myself that if something doesn't work out the way that I intended it to work out, that it's not necessarily a failure if I understand why it didn't work out, right? And I think
Mm,
that becomes the key differentiator where sometimes people fail and they're just like, all right, they throw their hands up and they just put their heads in the sand. And
yeah.
if you're having this conversation with them and you're somebody who is an empath or you like to help people, you start asking questions and they don't have answers, and then you're like, all right, well, I'm just gonna leave it alone. And I realized that for me, the the piece, the resolve is what happened, why did it happen, what did you learn from it, what are you not going to do moving forward. And the learning was don't do too much. Like just be really good at what you do, and when it's time to scale, understand why you're scaling, and also making sure that you're pulling in the right people and the right pieces to scale, which goes back to the abundance mindset. And so there's there are very few moments in my life as an adult where I'm like, you failed. You did it wrong. It didn't work out because it's just not the way that my brain works. And then the second part of it that I think, or the third part that has given me real peace in the journey is I found myself specifically with that moment, if we're, honing in on the nonprofit, where I've met other people who started nonprofits and they're
Hmm.
talking about their nonprofit. I'm like, well, this is what I learned and this is what I did and
Right.
this is what happened. And for me, that is like the highest reward of something not working out, is that I can now give that wisdom to somebody else, whether
Hmm.
it's how do you start it? Because even the way that I started that nonprofit was wild crazy, because most people, it takes them like 6 months to a year or more to actually like start a nonprofit, formulate it, do all of the government things, get a lawyer. And I just was like in my house and I was like, I'm gonna start a nonprofit. And I had my certification within like 30 days. And so
Yeah.
for me, even being able to tell somebody like, yo, this is how I expedited the process,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I created a nonprofit in like record time, according to myself. Like, to me, that learning and being able to give that learning to somebody else, just the delulu in me just won't let me categorize it as a failure, but like a really valuable learning about self, around how things work, and just around like personal capacity, and like how
Yeah.
do you like optimize that for the better and just overall life goals.
I mean, I don't think any of it is Delu. I mean, this is actually why I'm excited to have you on the show,
Mhm.
because you might not even realize it, or even as you're sharing all of these experiences and stories, you're living, breathing a growth mindset, because you're not waiting and questioning and like you're just trying things as like a tiny experiment to try it out. And the fact that you don't look at failures as like a mistake, you're learning from it. That's the part of a growth mindset where you're a student and then you become a
Mhm.
teacher. So you're a
Mhm.
continuous lifelong learner, and I love that you're passing that on to other people too.
I see that. I think a big part of it is so much of how I've looked at entrepreneurship has been for community. And the way that I've been, and I realized this, especially over the last year, the last 8 months, because so many things have happened in our world,
Yeah.
that I have been really actively trying to build a community first and foremost that
Hmm.
allows me to live the life that I want to live. And as I think back to like conversations that I have with adults as a teenager, and like a version of community has always been there. Like I've always been like, I want to make money to hang out with my friends. Like I want to make money to vacation with my friends. I want to own a house so that like I can have parties with my friends. Like there's always been this sense of community. And I think most people that I know who know me, who've engaged in me, they will say, I'm a little bit of a busybody if I hear that there's a problem. And I always want to figure out how to solve it, but I wouldn't know how to solve it if I didn't actually do things. And so
Hmm.
there's always a little bit of I just need to kind of do it and see what happens. Otherwise, it's just going to like sit on my soul and torture me. Like it's just, and that was one of those kids that I was always in trouble, because like anything that came to my brain, I was like, I need to see, I need to understand
Yeah.
how this thing works. And so
Work.
there were moments where I was taking apart the lawnmower because how does this work? And then I would put it back together, and then the lawnmower would actually break, not because of me, but when it broke, I was the person who was fixing it
Because you knew how it would put
because I
together.
knew how
Yeah,
it
that's
worked. And so
amazing. Yeah.
I look at life a lot like that. And so I may not broadcast everything that I do because the immigrant ego in me is just like, can't be failing publicly. But once it's done, and I'm like, all right, so I did it. I liked it. I didn't like it. This worked. This didn't work. I'm like more than happy to just give, just keep giving
Right, and
because
sharing that. Mhm.
and sharing because it's how else would we know, right? And I think so much like the world is the reason why the world moves the way that it does and not to its best ability is because of gatekeeping information and gatekeeping
Mhm.
knowledge. And so, you know, I don't know how people can transform and thrive without like learning. Like there's just
Yeah,
it's just an inherent part of the process, but also like who wants to thrive by themselves? Like you want to
right.
thrive in a space where you can give and people can give to you, and that's what community looks like. So
Well, and I'm glad you brought up community. Well, one, I'm also grateful we're in the community for our Add Color leaders. That's how we've
mhm,
continued to stay connected, even though we've known each other just through our industry networks and
mhm.
contacts. I'm curious to ask regarding community, who and what supported you just during your transformation as an entrepreneur?
So many people. Um, yeah, I th- I don't even think I realized how many people were helping until maybe probably about 2 years ago.
Mm,
Um, and I think that's probably one of the best signs of community is that it just keeps moving, right? Like it's not always going to be in these big grand gestures, but in like the small things. And even thinking back to moments where people are like, "So how are you?" And then it's like, "I'm cool, I'm great," right? Because we're on autopilot. And then they're
yeah.
like, "No, but wait, how are you really?" Because you're doing all of these things, and then I would have to like stop and think, "Oh,
Hmm.
huh, I guess I am a little tired. I'm gonna take 2 weeks off," right? And so even those little moments where I look back and I see them as being extremely helpful. And
Hmm.
so there isn't one person or one moment that I can like lock in on. Um, Nisha Tweed, who we both know, I've known her
Yeah,
for
love
pretty
her.
much all of my advertising career. And we've always kind of been in this pushing and pulling each other relationship into better spaces. And so whether it's like pulling back, like you're doing too much, call it down, or the push of I think you can do more, and here's how you can
Mhm.
do more, and here's a resource. And so that's just like one person, but I feel like in variations of that, Kai, who I started Valerie with, we had a podcast together. We still do technically, but that's another one of those relationships where it's a pull and it's a push. And so many of my friendships, industry wise, personal wise, I just feel like it's always that balance of helping each other. And I don't know how else to move and I don't know how else to operate at this point. I feel like it is purposely embedded into my DNA. And I'll tell you this one little short story. Went away to college, came back, hated it. It came back to New York. And when I came back, like many immigrant parents, my parents were like, "Listen, if you live here, you need a job or you have to be in school. Like, there's no just being here." And my brain would never allow me to just sit anyway. But I got a job because I like money, and so this job was paying me like 40K, and I was like 19 years old. But it was 20 miles away from my house. I didn't have a car when I started the job, and so I was taking the bus, and the bus was like, I was living in Long Island at the time. It was like an hour and a half ride.
Mm.
The first day of work, I was sitting next to this woman, and we're just having small talk. She's like, "Where do you live?" I'm like, "I live in Freeport." She's like, I live in Freeport too." She's like, "Traffic was so crazy today." I was like, "Oh, I'll take the bus." And she was like, "That's crazy. You are not going to take the bus." And she's like, "I'm not going to pick you up from your house, but if you walk out to the main road, we could drive together."
Oh
And
wow.
every day she drove me to work, and I would be like, "Hey, like, here's some money for gas," and she's like, "I'm good. Keep your money." And
Aw.
that moment, and I remember being, especially coming from a place where we don't ask for help, and also it's like, why are you giving me things? Like,
Yeah.
do I owe you now?
Yeah.
And the thing that I told myself was, I'm gonna do that for somebody else. And so
Mm.
when I got my car, my mindset was always, if you're going in the same direction, I will give you a ride. And so
Yeah.
if the train is in that direction, I'll give you a ride to the train. If your home is in the same direction as me, I'll give you a ride home. It doesn't matter. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And so I've taken that approach to community and to
Mhm.
learnings and to failure. And so I was like, if we're all going in the same direction. We're trying to be successful. And so whatever I have that can give you gas or give you a ride on that way, I am happy to give it because so many people have given it to me, whether I realized they were giving it to me
Mhm.
or not. And so that's like my idea of what community is. It's just it's being active. Like, you have to be in community with other people in order for a community to work. And there's just so many things that so many ways that that can come to life, whether it's giving advice, whether it's giving a ride, whether it's sharing something. But it's, for me, that is the only way that entrepreneurship, transforming, thriving is going to be worthwhile, is if you're doing it with other people.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, the gift of community. I mean, that they're the ones that are supporting us to continue to grow and thrive.
Mhm.
And even speaking about thriving, I am curious when it comes to the habits that help you thrive. What are things that have helped you thrive in terms of your habits or steps that you take?
Mm. Honestly, it changes. And I'm constantly trying to figure out what the new thing is,
Mhm.
and or resolve trying to go back to moments where I was like, I was thriving. And everything was amazing. And realizing that also with the thriving means that you're growing. And so the thing that worked for you 5 years ago may not be working in the moment.
Mhm.
This week, it's been getting up and going to the track and running and
Yeah.
making sure that I'm actually having that moment before I start working to just like release some energy. At other moments, it's been journaling. When I got that executive coach, one of the main things, and that held me down for so many years, was writing out my day as if it already happened. Not a
Mhm.
to-do list, but like to your point earlier, like manifesting
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
the day should be. And I would say between moving my body and writing things down at various points in my professional life, both of those things have worked extremely well. And sometimes it's been going to the gym, sometimes it's been taking up a um, new activity like capoeira or running
Mhm.
or tennis. But there's always been a little bit of that pull and push between needing to actually like physically get energy out of my body in order to like receive something. And then also the other one of writing everything that is in my brain and trying to get as much of it out as possible to
Mhm.
formulate a strategy to move forward. And so it's the two rituals I would say have worked. And then on the flip side, I would say when I'm not doing those things, chaos ensues. So I would say between those two, those are probably the rituals that I've seen be the most beneficial to me when it comes to thriving, where I feel good mentally,
Mhm.
physically, spiritually, because there's nothing stagnant inside the body and the brain. And that's just been, I realize when I'm not thriving, when I'm not feeling good, it's because things just feel stagnant. And so I just always need to be moving something, my fingers, and actually using a pen and paper. I was writing on a pen and paper like 2 days ago I was at a client's office and they were like, what are you doing? Are you journaling? I was like, no, I'm just writing. I need to get what's
Mhm.
in my brain onto paper, and to the point of like magic, there's something, it's just different when you're actually writing out the words versus typing it.
Yeah.
Um, because it's just need to move. Need to move in order to really feel the effects of thriving in the moment.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I mean, it sounds like you have so much in your own toolkit and you're so self-aware to know what you need when it comes to
Mm,
nourishing, whether it's your heart, your mind, body, soul.
mm,
And it doesn't have to be the same every day. You're like
yeah.
listening to yourself of what's going to help you thrive in that moment throughout the day.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
speaking of thriving, how do you define like thriving? What does it mean to you?
Oh, it's I think it's just feeling content,
Mm,
and the feeling of content of physically, mentally, spiritually, vocationally, feeling like there's more that you could be doing, but you don't need to. Right? And so, and it sounds weird because I think earlier in my career, and shit, maybe even a couple of months ago, there would have been a moment where it's just like, there's more. I need to be doing more. And today it's really just about being okay with what is happening in the moment, feeling okay, um, physically, spiritually, mentally, okay. And it's all of those things. I think if any of those are a little bit off kilter, it starts to feel off. Um, and so when I'm checking in with myself, that is what I'm thinking about. It's the I'm in a bunch of groups, but one of the groups that I'm in, the way that we check in with each other as we start our sessions is this RSVP me, and I'm just gonna forget what the acronym means, but it's um, relationally, like how are your relations in the moment with
mm,
your friends, your loved ones, all of those
yeah.
things. As spiritually, like how do you feel spiritually in the moment? Um, professionally, and then emotionally. I forget what the M and the E mean, but even those check-ins when I'm like going through, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm thriving. You know?
Mm.
I've been working so hard, like I have not checked in with myself. And then when I do the RSVP me, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm thriving. I'm great. Like
Mm,
everything is going as it should. And I think without checking in, we may just end up piling things on, feeling like we need to do more and more and more and
right.
more in order to meet whoever's standards. And so as long as all of those things are balanced, I'm like, that is what thriving means to me. Because this matrix of living in New York and also being in this industry can have you feel like you're not doing enough when you are doing exactly what the human body was designed to do, which is to live and have and be able to experience all of the different emotions in a way that allows you to like honor your life. Like,
Mhm.
because once it's done, it's done. So as long as you're able to like be balanced, and it's not that every moment is like extremely good, but there's some balance to it. I'm like, great, I'm thriving.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hearing like you're also just honoring your choices, doing less,
Yeah.
and having like that harmony of that
Mm.
balance in your life because you're living in alignment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Harmony is a great word. Love it.
Yeah. Well, I would love to ask like how you pause and celebrate and acknowledge your growth and success.
Ooh. You know, I did a little bit earlier. You said something, I can't remember what you said, but I was like, I'll receive it. I've just been receiving compliments. Honestly,
Mm.
it is the receiving it and not feeling like I need to
Over
deflect
explain. Yeah.
or over explain, um, into the point of the magic that when you set a goal and that goal is coming to fruition and someone
Mm,
acknowledges that, oh, you said a thing and that thing is
yeah.
happening,
Yeah.
to just go, oh yeah, thank you. It's like, and and I find this with so many of my friends who have been overachievers. They've like
Mhm.
set these really high goals that we don't necessarily take the moment to like really to reflect on those goals or receive the acknowledgement. So I was like, oh, okay, oh yeah, I did accomplish that thing. Okay, now what's next? And I'm like, before we get to a what's next, let's actually like sit in the win and just
Mm,
whatever that means for me is just saying thank you. Like, oh,
yeah.
cool, I appreciate that. Because my previous brain was like, oh, I did it. No, I got to do something else. I
Right.
got to
What's
figure out
next?
what the next, what's
Yeah.
next. And so I'm just like, how can I just like sit in it and also just honor the body? I just don't feel like, and maybe this is like mature 40 brain. Like our bodies are just meant to keep going, going and going and going. And so I'm just like, where are these moments that can be carved out where the win, you get to like bask in the win.
Hmm.
And that is, even if it's for a day, even if it's for an hour, even if it's just receiving a compliment, like really just receiving the win, because everybody's not winning. And that's why podcasts like yours are important, right? Is that if you're not winning, what do you do? Like you need to transform something, and
Yeah.
that transformation has to have a goal. And if the goal is, and it should be to thrive, right? And so like, and then you thrive, and then what? Do you now need to transform again? Or do you actually like sit in it and like own it and hone it and just like be an expert in thriving, which I think is like probably one of the highest forms of winning at life, is to like have like consistent moments of just thriving and not feeling
Hmm.
like there's something else to do and just feeling content in that moment.
I like that. I might borrow that from you. Being an expert in thriving. That's a
And
good one.
it's I don't know. We don't hear enough people talking about being experts in, and just being alive. And
Yeah.
like, yes, you did this thing in your career. Yes, you did this thing in your personal life, but also just like sitting in it and like having the basking in the reward. And I think,
Mhm.
what's been sold to us is that we're doing all of this so that when we retire, we have a great retirement,
Right. And why wait for
which
that? Like, enjoy
why
life
wait?
now. Yeah.
Why wait? And so
Exactly.
I'm like, I want to figure out like the thriving to me is like is like the precursor to retirement. It's like, and if you can like thrive before you retire, how much better will your retirement be? Because you're a master at it. And there are people who, and as I'm getting older, I know more people who are retiring and they're like struggling with retirement. Like they're not winning at it, and some of them are going back into work. I've also convinced a few friends to take sabbaticals, and I'm like, oh, you don't know how to not. So I think, that would, for me, that is like the thing, is like, what does it look like to just be and like have
Mhm.
like a real human moment. And it's the result of like, it's the benefit, it's the reward for transforming and thriving, because you identified something that needed to change, you changed it, there was a positive impact from that change, and now you get to like sit in it and just,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah. Well, and then the last question I want to ask you is what is one message, mantra, or advice that you'd like to leave with people, especially for those who might be struggling to take that first step towards their own transformation?
um, let's say believe in community,
Hmm.
believe in abundance, and do no harm. I
Mm,
think those three you can't lose with those three values, mantras. Like, there's just no, I don't think you can lose, right? Because the community will always take care of you. And then if you're doing it in a way that is not transactional, but actually to have harmony, then you will always be good. Um, if you believe in abundance, then even when you feel like there isn't enough, you know that there's more, right?
Hmm.
The glass, there's all, even if your glass is half full, there's always going to be something or someone or an opportunity that can fill your cup, because you just understand that there's, like, we're so small in the idea of the universe and the idea of Earth. Like, you're just a person. There's like 8 billion people on this planet, and however many trillions and quadrillions of dollars floating around, and 24 hours in a day and 365 days in a year. There's like so many things that can happen. And so abundance should always be uh, a central thought. And then the last one is do no harm. I think, in the world and in the construct of capitalism, there's always this idea that in order to win, you have to do it by any means necessary.
Hmm.
And that to me is in conflict with the community.
Right.
Um, that And so if you're doing all of these things, it should be in service of yourself first and foremost, but also in service of your community. And so you should not be harming yourself in
Hmm.
order to transform and thrive, and you should not be harming your community. And the reason why harm is often done is because people believe that there's only but so much to go around, and there's way more than enough to go around. And so those three would be my central mantras and way of being in order to transform and thrive.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that and just being here today. It's a really inspiring conversation for everyone to hear from you, and a reminder that transformation begins when we embrace our challenges, learn from those setbacks, and really take action to move forward. So, thank you for joining us today on Transform and Thrive. And for everyone listening, if today's episode resonated with you, definitely share it with someone who could benefit from hearing this story and subscribe to the channel. Thank
Thanks for having me.
you.